Aloha and welcome to Thumbing Through Yesterday, the podcast where we take our favorite books from the shelf, dust them off, and remind ourselves why it is we love them so. My name's Tom Galley, and joining me today is Tony Pasculi.
Thanks, Tom.
And today we are talking about one of my favorites, Dream Park, a collaboration with Larry Niven and someone else.
Steve Barnes.
Steve Barnes.
And interesting, this is 2/3 of the collaboration that wrote The Legacy of Heorot.
It is.
Which we read a couple of weeks/months ago. I'm not sure.
I've noticed, we've got the guideline, no Heinlein all the time.
Yeah.
But as I'm looking through the books that I've picked and the books that are still on my to-be-done list, I'm thinking I might have should have done a no Niven all the time as well. Apparently he's more of a favorite author of mine than I had realized.
I think Niven's worth reading. I think, it's interesting, though. One of the things I was struck by reading this, because I read this when it first came out, or maybe shortly after it first came out in 81. And it feels much more like Steve Barnes than it does like Larry Niven to me.
Okay.
Yeah. By which I mean, I haven't read a lot of Steve Barnes other than the collaboration with Niven and Purnell and the Dream Park stuff. So it feels not very much like Larry Niven, I guess is what I'm saying.
Well, he does a lot. Niven does a lot of collaborations.
He does.
And many of the books that I've got on my list are his collaborations. So maybe I'm less a fan of Niven and more a fan of Niven as a team. Niven is part of a team.
That's fair. I think Niven is an idea guy, and his ideas are great, but he's not strong on characterization.
Yeah, he's definitely an idea guy. I mean, Known Space is, it's fantastic.
All those short stories with the visit to the neutron star and the antimatter star and the ring world itself.
And the ring worlds.
Yeah, it's amazing stuff.
Yeah. Indeed.
So why... I have a theory, but why is this a favorite for you?
I have a theory.
I do.
I'm curious to what the theory is. This is going to be an odd answer. The song that they rewrote the words to Norwegian Wood.
Okay.
The song about the enchanted sword with the high ego. I read this book for the first time early high school, and that stupid song has never left my head.
Wow.
Every time I hear Norwegian Wood come on, and Hannah loves the Beatles, so it's on our Alexa often. In my head, I'm singing along, and I'm using the words from this book.
That is hilarious. Okay, I would not have guessed that. I would have guessed, because I think there's the premise of a sort of Westworld style dream park where you go and live out your sort of more D&D-ish style fantasies as opposed to gunslinger fantasies. So I think that's a really appealing premise. But then there's also the murder mystery, which is the heart of the story. And then there's the whole the mechanics of the game itself. Yeah. Yeah,
I mean, there's some good ideas in this.
Yeah.
And when I was reading one of the prefaces or forewords or afterwards, I don't remember, but it was one of the authors talking about the writing of this book. It was interesting because they came up with the concept for Dream Park, and then they were trying to decide what would the book be about, and they picked a murder mystery because they said you can hang anything on a murder mystery.
Yeah.
Right. It's a great skeleton for any novel.
Yeah.
So it's not that they had a burning desire apparently to write a murder mystery. They just thought it would be a very easy way to facilitate whatever other story they were trying to tell.
The impression I got from reading the foreword was that Steve Barnes was just really wanted to collaborate with Larry Niven and just kept throwing in pitches until Larry Niven bit on one.
Yeah.
And then said, okay, now we have to make it a story. Yeah. Not just a pitch. Yeah. But yeah, that's great. I mean, there's a couple of plot engines that work for any setting and any story. And one is a murder mystery and one is, coming of age story and one is a falling in love story. Yeah. Or a falling out of love story, I guess, is the flip side of that.
Yeah.
So those are great plot engines for anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is a pretty, murder mysteries are designed to be complex, right? And this is a pretty Byzantine one.
Yeah.
It goes weird places.
Yeah. I think as a murder mystery, I found it a little unsatisfying because so much of the action is dominated by the park stuff in the game that the murder mystery itself doesn't start. God, when does it start? I feel like it starts like halfway through the book. That can't be right, though.
Yeah, I mean, the game is underway,
Yeah.
before the events of the murder mystery occur.
Yeah.
At least, the murder part of the
Yeah.
murder mystery occurs. Yes, I mean, we're halfway into the book probably when our security guy finds out what's going on, and they hatch this ridiculous plan to infiltrate the party and solve the murder from the inside.
Yeah.
Which is Murder Mystery 101.
Yeah. I feel like it's. Wait, I should pull up the table of contents. It actually might be not. I think it was less than halfway through the book. I think it was around chapter 13.
No, it was substantially into the book.
It's substantially into the book,
becomes
for sure.
a murder mystery. Yeah. I don't know. There's a lot that I enjoy about this book. I mean, the idea of having, this is a step shy of a holodeck on a Starship Enterprise.
Yeah.
Because they actually build everything. So this is just a monstrous Disney theme park.
Yeah.
And I think there's some little inconsistencies in that. You have the game master who shows up a mere 24 hours before the game starts to implement his entire world. A lot of this world would have taken months of heavy construction.
Yeah.
Did they send him the floor plan and say there will be a lake here, and he built the game around that?
I know there was a volcano. There's a dedicated volcano which they climb up. It's not a hologram.
Yeah,
that volcano is real. So yeah. I appreciate, one of my quibbles with Westworld is they explain how the guns work. And it's like, oh, your guns won't fire at a human guest, so you're fine with that. But then everybody wears a knife also, and there's nothing to stop you from plunging a knife into a human guest, right? Mm-hmm. And it's not really easy to tell who's human and who's a robot, and that can have disastrous consequences.
Indeed.
So they do address that by saying your hilt, you can have either a fixed blade, which you withdraw before combat and turns into a holographic blade, and that solves that problem. But it doesn't solve the problem of like the back end of your halberd or whatever, cracking someone across the back of the skull, or it doesn't solve the problem if somebody gets drowned by a zombie. And I'm like, no, that's insane.
They actually have scuba divers under the water that pull her under, and then they shove a regulator in her mouth.
Yeah.
And that character responds when we find out later. She says, "I nearly drowned from laughing."
Yes.
But I don't think that would be most people's response. I think they would nearly drown from
panic.
Drowning, from panic.
No way would anyone let anyone do that ever. It's a problem. It's always a problem with these sorts of things where you start to blur the line between fiction and reality in a substantially real world, and you make the stakes life or death. And all that's just dangerous. Like, did you see the movie The Game with Michael Douglas? Yeah.
Absurd movie.
Yeah. So a lot of that applies here as well, I think.
Yep. But the idea sure is neat.
It is fun.
The idea that you could actually do that you could be a barbarian or a spellcaster or a fill-in-the-blank, and for a week of your life, just immerse yourself at this resort.
Yeah. Now, okay, here's another, I wouldn't say a quibble. What did you think about the competitive aspect of the game? Because that kind of rubbed me the wrong way.
If I were looking at this as a gamer, if I lived in this world, I would have some substantial problems with a lot of things about the game.
Yeah.
Now, the whole commercial aspect of it, and they talk about movie rights and book rights and replayability and whatnot. Okay, the idea that I'm going to manufacture 5 square miles of terrain with all these built-in special effects is substantial. Yes, I need to recoup my investment somehow.
Yeah.
I can see some of that. But this idea that the players are in it for the points, and you're talking about a very finite system. I mean, we're talking about Disneyland, except you could service, 2,000 people a year in this particular fantasy. It's just not realistic to me. It's not something you could have enough people playing enough games to buy into. It wouldn't be meaningful, right? It would be like the Left-Handed Dentist Association having service awards or something like that. All 30 of them.
Yeah. I wasn't clear on how much the gaming system extended beyond Dream Park itself, like whether you could play other games to get points or only Dream Park games counted towards that. They have this international organization, and I assume if it's international, there are other parks and other venues for doing this sort of thing. Yeah. Yeah,
they don't ever address that, but you're right. There is an authority that they're beholden to.
Yeah.
Who, they send a representative in to muck things up, of course, when the make sure that the game is still viable, even though there's a murder mystery going on.
Yeah.
Yep.
But I had a problem with the idea of playing essentially LARPing a role-playing game as a competition, especially between the lore master and the game master. What was the game master called? The game master had a different title. I forget.
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah. And in particular, so another thing that's different about this Dream Park as opposed to a standard RPG, tabletop RPG, is that there's a lore master who is the head of the party, and everybody kind of signs on with them, and they get 25% of all the experience points, whatever they call them. And he makes decisions for the group. Yeah. And you just kind of follow his lead, and he can make or break your game experience. But they frame this whole thing as a competition between him and the game designer, right? And whether the game designer is going to be fair because these guys are already beefing with each other. Yeah. So that's just like, that does not sound like a pleasant role-playing experience at all.
Yeah. And again, you've got this presumably pretty small world, and these two have become superstars in it, in their own respective ways. I mean, of course, there's going to be conflict. You know, this is WWF, but on a smaller scale.
Yeah. They do address one aspect that I think, as soon as you assign points to a game, and as soon as there's a monetary value associated with points, you get enough points, and it's like 2,000 points, you become a lore master or a game designer or whatever, and you can start making money off of this game. So people are they're gonna cheat and they're gonna min max. Yeah, they're gonna try to go for points, and they do have a cheater in the game, but they get killed pretty early on. Yeah, they're like out to score points for themselves at the expense of the party.
Well, and again, you see, that's realistic.
Yeah,
and you've been in role playing games with people who were there to game the system more than they were to enjoy the game.
Yeah, I've never really played with people like that. Yeah, so I've heard stories. I've heard terrible, terrible stories, but I always played with my friends. So
yeah, I've played with friends, but they were still. I mean, the sort of things like, hey, look, there's a pile of items, there's a pile of treasure, right? And we get an experience point if we try the gauntlets on, so that you pass the gauntlets on and everyone tries them. So that's not the way life works.
Yeah. Have you ever been to a science fiction convention?
Oddly enough, I have not.
Okay. So there's a convention, there's a practice at conventions of taking well-established tunes and coming up with new words for them, and all singing them, and everybody gets familiar with them, and they have sing-alongs, and that's called filking.
Okay.
And so that reminded me a lot. I've never participated in filking. I've gone to a couple of cons. A lot of this gamer behavior strikes me less as gamer behavior, more as fanish behavior, like con behavior, like everybody sleeping with everybody. That strikes me as con behavior, especially back in the 80s. Yeah. So
it's a science fiction book from the 80s. Of course, everybody sleeps with everybody. I think it was actually legally required by the Writers Guild. Yeah. So this, I don't know. Again, just the whole concept of and at some point, I had come up with this great scheme where I was going to come up with and it's kind of like the active shooting houses that you can go in and run gun drills and whatnot. Coming up with a D&D based idea of that, where I'd have a warehouse, and the floor of the warehouse would be studded with holes, and you could set up 4x8 walls. You could create mazes and rooms and whatnot, and then people would go through with rattan swords and cardboard armor, and you would actually have a real life D&D adventure, and every 6 months you'd reconfigure the maze and that kind of thing. So this was sort of just like seeing that crazy dream taken even further. I love the fact though, so this was in California, right? And there was the big earthquake.
Yes.
So most of California, a substantial chunk fell off, and the only viable business entity still in there was it was Dream Park.
Yeah.
And they basically bought what was left of California, and they more or less rule what's left of California, which is how they get away with the game continuing even though there's been a murder.
Yeah.
They don't bother to tell the local authorities for a while, and then even if they tell the local authorities, they tell them, but we're not going to let you go in and do anything about it. We've got it covered. I love that concept that this entity has taken over what's left of California and now is the de facto government and the only industry there.
I enjoy. At one point in the book, I forget who does this. They do a tour of sunken California. Yeah, which is fun. Yeah, I remember that because I grew up in California, and that was a big thing. Growing up in California is like waiting for the big one that's just going to take the entire coastline, split the state in half. Yeah, I don't know if people still think about that. Yeah.
Yeah. I've always wondered why the assumption is it's going to fall into the ocean. Why isn't the assumption it's going to go the other direction and it's going to be a new mountain range, or that it's simply going to migrate north or south and be warmer or be cooler?
That is a good question.
Presumably
I assume we know
there,
if there's some plates colliding, we know which plate is under the other plate. They tend to, one plate will go under, and if they know, but it's also perfectly valid to assume that people just gravitate to that assumption because it's more vivid.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it does look like a finger sticking out in the ocean, so yeah, it's not hard to imagine it falling off.
Yeah. So this takes place in 2051, which is about 70 years in advance of where it is written. And now it is 2025. So we've got about 26 years until this is feasible. I don't think it's feasible in 26 years.
Well, I don't believe in holograms or this type of technology where you can project a solid three-dimensional image in midair.
Yeah.
I just don't think that's going to happen. Not that it's not going to happen in our lifetimes. I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think it's viable.
Yeah.
Light doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
The idea that you could, engineer that you could build a lake and that you could plant trees that aren't going to live that long, but they're the right kind of trees that are supposed to be from Haiti. The fact that you could build a volcano, sure, I'll sign off on all of that.
I could see doing it as a mixed reality game where you have to wear a headset, and I could see that headset getting down to maybe just contact lenses and earpieces. Mm-hmm. And so you see things that aren't actually there. I don't know how you interact with that. I don't know how you stab a zombie that is a hologram though, with any kind of satisfaction. Yeah.
But they're not all holograms, right? Because
some of them are
players who die can get points by returning to the game as zombies or monsters. Or
I don't know how you stab an actor with a holographic knife that gives you any kind of satisfaction either. It's like whoosh whoosh. There's no connection. There's no resistance.
Yep.
Yeah. So I think we're a ways away from that. On the other hand, in the very sentence where they talk about the year being 2051, they also talk about the guy sitting in his office and going through his to-do list, which is printed on fan-fold paper.
Yes, I remember fan-fold paper. Such wonderful things.
I haven't seen fan-fold paper in 30 years, maybe more.
I've got some in a box somewhere in my house. Yeah.
Oh, amazing. You sell it on eBay. Yeah.
Conceptually, I'm still a fan. I like the idea because a printout is a single unit.
Yes.
You can't lose pages.
Yeah.
You can lose the entire thing. But it's hard to predict what is and isn't going to happen technologically, right? They were off on the computers and they were off on the holograms. Well, we shouldn't say that. We've still got a couple of decades.
Yeah.
I could be proven wrong yet.
So I was thinking about this in comparison to Legacy of Heorot. And I really think reading these in close conjunction that Purnell is the one that is best at characterization, and that his influence is missing here, is lacking here. So I found this a little bit frustrating to read, as much as I love the premise. Because I remember, I read this back when it came out, and I don't think I ever returned to it. I never said, "Oh yeah, that's what I've got to read again and again." Nope. It just passed. And Niven's the idea guy, and Steve Barnes is just the journeyman workhorse. And they talk about the writing process a little bit, and he blasted out a first draft, and then Niven came in and revised stuff. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Substantial revision. Barnes says he did, at least half of the work. But I feel like this reads a lot like the work of a beginning writer to me, not someone with the experience of Niven or Purnell. So, and that Barnes, for all his enthusiasm, and I think this was his idea, does not patch up the holes in Niven's game as well as Purnell does. Yeah.
Okay.
Have you read Footfall? I think that's another Niven Purnell.
Yeah.
And Lucifer's Hammer.
Lucifer's Hammer. That's actually on my contenders list. Yep.
Yeah.
So the talking about the game itself, the context of the game. They dug deep into cultural history. I mean, Cargo Cult and Kuru, the laughing sickness. I mean, I honestly don't know if the only reason I know what that was because I read this book in early high school and then found out that was a real thing, or if I had come across it elsewhere. But I mean, you're talking about a disease that happened to like a tribe of people in an underdeveloped area of the world is something incredibly rare, and it makes a headline appearance here.
I remember learning about it in a linguistics class of all places, because there was some unusual aspect of the language spoken by the people who were affected by Kuru. And so we got that, and we got the Kuru as a footnote. But what's interesting is that Kuru, not only is it a real disease, it's a prion disease. It's related to Creutzfeldt-Jakob and mad cow, bovine spongiform encephalopathy. Yeah.
Actually, I wonder maybe if when Mad Cow was out, maybe that was when I feel like it was earlier though. I feel like I probably was introduced to it, not experienced it. I was probably introduced to the concept when I read this.
Well, you read this before Mad Cow came out.
Yeah.
So you
decades before.
Yeah. So it's interesting that they decide to go with, as a scenario, there are scenarios called South Seas Treasure or something like that, and they are in Micronesia. And dealing with a cargo cult. I think this is the first place I ever heard about cargo cults, which are fascinating. And they really do a deep dive on that, and they explain in the afterwards how much research they did and how all the stuff that's in here basically is from. Yeah.
They didn't fabricate much at all culturally. The technology they fabricated clearly, but the setting and the players involved, no.
And that's a really interesting choice to make, because it's weird because their player archetypes are standard D&D archetypes with the exception of the engineer, right? They've got magic user, the thief, fighter, warrior, and cleric, and then an engineer, and then one other one, which I can't remember, which isn't really...
Well, the lore master is a category.
The lore master is a separate thing. Yeah, and then you take this D&D party and you shove it into a contemporary setting. So I was expecting something more Dungeons and Dragons-y, I guess. Some mazes, some monsters, some goblins and kobolds, and
Well, and they had the briefing ahead of time, and the game master was really quite tight-lipped about it, but he did say that firearms are part of this game. Yeah. And there was like this wave of disapproval that went through the room. Oh, firearms.
Yeah. So that said, I think they did a really good job with the lore, and some of it was really fun. Like the airplane egg, that was wonderful. Yeah. The cult is trying to hatch an airplane from an airplane egg, and in fact, it's a prototype nuclear weapon left over from World War II. Yeah.
And then the game master, that particular moment, the game master somewhere else says, they weren't supposed to go after that. It was an obvious distraction. Why was it there then if you didn't expect them to go after it? I call bullshit.
Yes, and why was it obvious? It was not obvious to me. I was like, oh yeah, obviously this thing. Yeah.
We're talking about the characterization. This stood out to me. So they're getting background from one of the in-game NPCs, and their guide is describing the way somebody died because he is exposed to this evil snake.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Which comes later. But he's talking about 2 days later, he was half rotten. The flesh hung loose on his bones. Next to Griffin, McWhorter groaned. Good Lord, is this really necessary? Acacia had her hand over her mouth. She looked a little green herself. These are seasoned gamers. These are veteran gamers. They're pros. They were the cream of the crop, and they were the first draft pick. Yeah. And they're getting green around the gills listening to a description of this. Didn't buy it, not for a second.
I know, yeah. Because if they've been exposed to D&D type stuff, they would have lost someone to a gelatinous cube at some point or something where you get consumed from the outside.
Horrific deaths are part of the game.
Yes. The crazy thing is, in the afterwards, they say, "Oh yeah, that's a real thing." Yeah.
Yeah, well, it can be a real thing, but it's been a month since I read this, and I took no notes, like 8 notes here.
All right, what was your favorite aspect of the game itself?
The spruce goose was in it.
The spruce goose,
yeah. I've always just conceptually loved the idea of that plane.
Yeah.
And it flew. It got like 8 feet off the water.
Yep.
Across the bay.
The real treasure was the spruce goose all along.
Yep. Oh, okay. So this is just picking on this is bad writing. This is just bad writing. All right. So this is the last day of the game. the gamers have been awake. They're waiting for the sun to rise. They have real watches with them, and they're counting down the seconds until the game starts, right? Yeah. When they had finished the game yesterday, the evil priests were holed up in the Spruce Goose, which was offshore. And we know that the evil priests can summon zombies.
Yeah.
Right? So their plan is basically to bum rush the Spruce Goose. This is their whole game plan. So the sun comes up, and then they sit there and watch as the door opens on the Spruce Goose, and a zombie gets out and goes down and sits in the rowboat to be the motor. They sit there and watch as the first priest gets out. They sit there and watch as the second priest gets out. They sit there and watch as the rowboat approaches the shore. Sit there and watch as the priest starts chanting and the zombies rise from the earth and begin to move towards them. And then they're like, all right, let's move, everybody. The hell?
Yeah.
It was bad playing, it's bad writing, it's bad strategy. Just bad. Shame on you, Larry and Steve.
So what did you think about the ending of the murder mystery where I forget what the guy's name, Tony in the book, the new player who turns out to be the one who is the thief of the neutral scent? That was an interesting idea.
That was a neutral scent was a really nice idea.
This is a scent which doesn't smell like anything, but it just heightens all your emotions because your olfactory system is directly wired into your brain, more directly than any other sensory apparatus that you have. So it operates on you at like a primitive level. So that was a great idea, and
it seemed to be quite effective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this guy who got sort of his arm twisted into going after and committing this robbery, and someone died in the commission of it, and now he's facing felony murder. And now the higher ups at the Dream Park have found the actual guy who planned the thing and who actually murdered the guy that the first guy tied up. But they can't prosecute him because that would be an embarrassment to the park. And they decided to just let him go. They're just going to fire him, but they're still going to prosecute the first guy, and he's still on the hook for felony murder, even though he didn't murder the guy. Now, legally, that's accurate because the guy did die in the commission of a felony, but they're sitting on exculpatory evidence, which they're just not going to reveal. You know, he could probably get his whole case thrown out. And they just decide, nah, he's still guilty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, this goes to what I was saying earlier about the fact they more or less run the state.
Yeah.
What's left of California there. But yeah, a lot of that didn't sit well with me. And like so many of these murder mysteries, I mean, the ending of this is very Agatha Christie, in that we have zero chance of even fishing in the right pond for a solution until you get to the last few chapters of the book. She adds this entire subplot. I'm saying it like Agatha Christie. They add this entire murder subplot that doesn't emerge until the last 2 or 3 chapters of the book. That has to do with the history of the dead guy and the history of one of the high executives there at Dream Park.
We get a little bit of hinting because we know that the security guard's place was broken into and a statue was stolen, and that gets highlighted a couple times. So you know that's going to be relevant. And you're sitting on there on chapter 30 of chapter 31. It's like, okay, you're going to explain the statue to me, right?
Yep.
But then we get this whole two other characters, and this whole complicated backstory just gets barfed out in the last chapter.
Yep.
Yeah, it's like, by the way, that's what really happened. It's like, oh, okay.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things I've never liked about mysteries, is that so many of them are written in that way where you're not expected to have a chance of solving them. And I don't know, I feel like I should have a chance. I feel like if I don't have a chance, then the people between the covers of the book shouldn't have a chance.
Yeah. Well, again, so that gets back to my quibble with this. As a murder mystery, it's an unsatisfying murder mystery because so much of the plot is devoted to the game itself. The game really needs to be much more of a backdrop to the murder mystery, and it's not. It takes front and center.
Yeah.
And we could have had this story told in a way that includes that last chapter, because that takes place before the game. We could have started with that.
Yeah,
right?
It could have been the preface, or what has gone before, or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, it was not, to me, a satisfying murder mystery.
Yeah.
And there were some procedural things in the middle. You know, they go to great lengths to talk about how tight their surveillance is within Dream Park.
Yeah.
To the fact that somebody polishes the stairs out of the maintenance hatches every 4 hours, because we find the clue because there's a footprint on one of these staircases coming out of a maintenance tunnel, and it was polished for it at least no more than 4 hours ago. It's like, no, people do not go into the basements and into the steam tunnels and polish the emergency exit doors. It doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And if it does happen, then there aren't these gaping holes that would allow a player to leave the game, enter the command facility, penetrate the command facility, steal something from a secure thing, and get back out unobserved.
Yeah.
Yeah. It just,
It's another thing, since you mentioned the labor-intensive cost of polishing the maintenance stairs every 4 hours, there's not a lot of robotics involved. There's not a lot of automation. There is less automation in Dream Park in 2051 than there is in Disneyland today.
Yep.
Yeah, that's striking. Because Disneyland was already doing animatronics back in 1981. I believe the Hall of Presidents was around in 1981.
Yeah.
Pirates of the Caribbean, with their...
Well, those aren't particularly functional robotics, but they are robotics.
But you could create an evolution of that, and they just said, nope, dump that, all holograms. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, heck, I've got a robot that cleans my floors.
Yeah.
They don't have a robot to clean floors and polish stairs. That seems unlikely.
Yeah.
Okay, stairs are tricky for a little hockey puck, but still.
Yeah. Hockey puck with extensible legs.
Yeah.
Could be done. Special stair cleaning robot. Yeah, I don't know.
Now, when we do get down to the murder, though, it is a really pedestrian plot.
Yeah.
Just your typical blackmail and then crime of opportunity.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, look, the guy who's been blackmailing me happens to be hogtied here in the break room and no one else is around. All I have to do is pinch his nostril shut.
Yeah. So I found myself wishing that, although unfairly, I would say, I found myself wishing that Michael Crichton had written this.
It would have been a very different book.
It would have been a very different book. But then, Michael Crichton did write Westworld, and Westworld was not great, honestly. I'm talking about the original movie. I don't think he wrote a novel of Westworld. He wrote the movie, and the movie was pretty Dullsville. Yeah.
Dude, Yul Brynner, come on.
Oh, Yul Brynner was amazing. It was stylish. It was shocking for the time. It was imaginative. But the plot is even thinner than this. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
true fact.
Yeah. And I think if there was a novel, it was a novelization by some other writer. I would love to see Michael Crichton just get into the technical weeds on something like this. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That would have been fun. I think the closest we could do is some sort of mashup of Congo and Timeline. Those both feel very similar to this to me.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know. Have you read either of those?
Congo, yes. I'm trying to remember if I've read Timeline or not. I don't.
That's the time travel one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nope.
Yeah. All right.
Just a bone I have to pick with these guys.
Go for it.
They start with a cast of characters.
Mm-hmm.
I hate books that start with a cast of characters. Almost never do you need to start with a cast of characters. The Mote in God's Eye. Yes, having a cast of characters to refer back to was really useful. Yeah. Come on, this is what, 350 pages maybe? I don't remember. This is nothing.
I ignore those. Yeah, if you can't paint a portrait of each of these distinct characters in your prose, then God help you, I'm not going to refer back.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to start by committing this list to memory before I turn to chapter 1.
However, along those lines, don't have 3 of your characters' names start with the letter A. Come on.
That's true. That is a shortcut I take when reading.
Yeah.
The A girl, the A guy. Oh, the other A girl. Wait a minute.
Yeah. Then you have 15 players and they all have 2 names because they all have an in-game name as well. And then some of the in-game names have nicknames. Mm-hmm. And it's just like, good Lord, hey, settle down. Pick one. Yeah.
I did like that they predicted the Hyperloop.
That was fun.
I mean, conceptually, a vacuum tube train. I mean, it's not much of a leap, but yeah.
That was fun. What was it? Boston to California in like 40 minutes?
Just over half an hour.
Yeah, that's pretty
good.
From
New York to Dallas.
Oh, New York to Dallas. Okay. Yeah.
Yep, that's all the notes I took.
That's all I got. That's all I have. Yeah.
That's all right. It is a fun little book, and I'm glad that I got to revisit it. I don't know when the last time I read it was, but it was still enjoyable to me.
Let me ask you, how many times had you read it up until now? Is this something you revisited many, many times?
No, my guess is that this was either the 3rd or 4th trip through it.
Okay, that's substantial. Like I say, I read it once and then it's like,
Yeah. But every time, I did find myself, every time the day ended and they started to camp, I was like, is this when they're going to sing the song? And they did sing a lot of songs, but, I kept having to wait.
You need to go to a con. That could be an actual song from a con for all I know. Yeah.
It could well be.
Yeah.
I could probably find it online without even looking hard.
Yeah.
If not, I could get ChatGPT to...
Yeah.
No, she won't sing. I'd have to get to 11 Labs to do it for me.
Oh, okay. Yeah. All right. Anything else?
Right. No, just to say, I enjoyed it. It's not high art, but it was fun.
It was fun. It was fun. It's a great premise, and it was fun.
All right. So what is up next for us?
Up next is a book by Werner Vinge called A Fire Upon the Deep.
Hey, I haven't heard of this before. I haven't read this before, rather. All right. Yay. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
See you in 2 weeks.